Hello again, I am Blunty and we're jumping right into this vid. There's often much debate about Intel's CPUs when it comes to gaming, specifically i5 versus i7, and in this video I'm comparing my own rig's i5 6600K with the new Kaby Lake 7700K i7 that I got in for reviewing one of MSI's new motherboards. Now, in standard CPU stress tests and benchmarks, of course the i7 outperforms the i5, that's what's supposed to happen. But the prevailing wisdom is that because the largest majority of games don't benefit much from the main benefits of the i7, that being a larger cache and hyper-threaded quad cores, all that sort of stuff, that you may as well just get an i5. But the i7s also generally run at higher default clock speeds, so there is a moderate difference there. But most would say not a big enough difference to justify the extra cost. The i5, preferably an overclockable model, will be the better bang for buck option if what you're primarily doing with your rig is gaming. And that's one of the main reasons I myself, when I built my latest ass-kicking rig R2 see-through, that I went with the 6600K Skylake i5 instead of the i7. But for my next rig, I think I want an i7, because there's one special use case that makes it really worthwhile. So let's take a stroll over to that point. Now, the first apples to apples comparison I want to show you is Watch Dogs 2. Now, aside from being a pretty fun game, it is a catastrophic monster when it comes to system resources. Even with my Founders Edition NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1080 and an overclocked i5 6600K, I can barely max it out at 1440p. Now, I'm a console gamer too, so I don't reach straight for the ritual suicide sword when a third-person open-world game runs at 30 frames per second, but in this game, there's a bunch of lag, some stuttering and weird, spongy kind of latency that happens when you're pushing it this hard. It is in fact very close to unplayable. But at 1080p on the system, it dances around the 60 FPS mark, so that's usually where I stick. But as you can see, the i7 has a much easier time at 1440p utterly maxed out. We do still dance under that magic 60 FPS mark, but it's a much more responsive, smooth gameplay experience. None of that sponginess in the controls over here. But that's just one example of an especially CPU brutal game. In Doom, once again, 1440p, and once again in the maximum possible settings, you can see the difference is much smaller. Both rigs easily gobble up this game and poop out triple-digit frame rates. The i7 still has an edge, of course, anywhere between sort of 10 and 30 frames per second, but at these frame rates, in a single-player shooter, and especially if you've got a high Hertz G-Sync or FreeSync monitor to nuke the tearing and the like, it makes no practical difference, really. Mafia 3 now, another third-person open-worlder, and this one is kind of the halfway point between how well Doom is optimized and how neck-stomping Watch Dogs 2 is. It's a very pretty game, but as you can easily see, it's not one that gets bottlenecked by the CPU. In fact, it's very close to identical on the i5 and the i7. Seems this game cares a lot more about your GPU than your CPU. I did of course do a bunch of other testing as well, but so far the standard advice is more or less correct. With only a few exceptions, most games just don't care that much about what the i7 brings to the table versus the i5 feature set. However, that very special use case I talked about in the opening, I like to stream on Twitch. My audience there is a fraction of what it is here on YouTube, but I really enjoy it. And I spent last year slowly ramping up over there, and this year the plan is to keep on pushing in. And my rig usually has more than enough grunt to squirt out a good looking 720p stream using OBS with a bunch of fancy crap going on all over the place. But when it came to streaming Watch Dogs 2, well, as you've been seeing, it's so greedy it just does not leave much at all CPU time left for OBS to do its video crunching thing. I had a very difficult time trying to find a balance of settings that would work at all, much less let me stream without impacting my gameplay in a ruinous way. But I did eventually find a balance that I could kind of do it okay. There was some frame rate issues here and there, both in the game and on the stream, but it was good enough to get the stream done. Ish, but it was hardly ideal. And this is where the i7 really comes into its own. With 4-core hyper-threading, a larger cache and higher clocks, it all pulls together to make streaming Watch Dogs 2 basically perfect. As you can see, I play the game in a 1080p window on my 1440p screen, and I do this so I can have the chat room right next to it on the same monitor and the like. I actually use two screens when I'm streaming. The second screen is where OBS sits, as well as a bunch of other stuff I need to glance at. But the point is, the i7 makes a vast difference here. And yes, again, for the moment, this is a one-of-a-kind sort of edge-case kind of scenario. But going forward, I doubt Watch Dogs 2 will be alone for long in its demands on a system. And while usually I've had no worries at all with AAA PC games on a single i5-based streaming rig, I do occasionally have to turn down some of the settings a little bit to get it all running nice and smooth, but the i7 eliminates that need to compromise completely. And here's where the pot gets filled with delicious, sweet, golden honey. There is, in fact, enough spare grunt here to push the stream to 60 frames per second without any noticeable impact on the game's own frame rate. That, right there, as a Twitch streamer, is why I think my next rig will wrap itself around a shiny new Intel Core i7. Spending the effort there, instead of a more complicated and awkward dual PC gaming rig that some streamers go with to avoid compromising on their gameplay experience and they move the demands of OBS to an entirely separate PC, it just makes more sense to me to stick with a single PC streaming rig. They are vastly easier to manage for a start, and better for the sake of space, better for power consumption, and even right down to pumping heat into your room. So that, my gentle viewer, is why some gamers, not all, but some gamers will absolutely benefit in a very large, very significant, very useful, very practical way from going with the i7 in a gaming rig, even though convention and a gazillion Reddit threads full of opinionated and furious dorks will tell you that you don't need anything more than an i5 for your gaming rig. But there you go. I hope this has been useful, informative, or entertaining. Hopefully all three. I am Blunty. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time.